And we're back live here on Narrative as we bring you the first time we've heard from Epstein's accountant, Richard Kahn. His deposition under oath was given a few weeks ago. The video just released yesterday. We've edited it because it's 6 hours long in its entirety. Yesterday, we had Darren Indyke. He's the lawyer. Today, it's the accountant. Look for the stuff around Jane Doe number 4 because he vacillates a little bit at the beginning. He says, absolutely, Trump's accuser, Jane Doe 4, was given a settlement by the Epstein estate. Then he withdraws that later on, so look for that. But just in general, look at the size of money that's being floated around, the complexity of an operation like Jeffrey Epstein had, and the constant denials here by Richard Kahn makes it, to me, difficult to believe that he knew nothing about what was going on. This runs about 2.5 hours. I'm going to let it roll. I won't be here on the back end of it, but I do hope you can share your thoughts and DM me, and also share with me in the chat anything that strikes you that is worthy of further analysis. This is, after all, a crowdsourcing effort, and as you at home are watching and noting and seeing all these full-length depositions, it might remind you of something. It might clue you into something you've heard somewhere else. And the more we can do that, the more we can engage with this fuller length content and understand exactly what was said, the more important these crowdsourcing efforts can be. So pay close attention. It's interesting stuff. I watched a lot of it yesterday, but let's get into it right now. This is Richard Kahn before the Oversight Committee in the House Epstein investigation.
Richard Kahn, conducted by the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform under the authority granted to it pursuant to House Rule 10. Mr. Kahn, before we begin, I would like to go over the ground rules for this deposition. Can the reporter please swear in the witness?
Yes, sir. Sir, will you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly declare and affirm, under the penalty of perjury, that the testimony you will give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions before we begin?
No.
Mr. Kahn would like to make a statement before we begin. It's an opening statement. I have to give a copy to the court reporter as well.
We'll mark this statement as Exhibit 3.
I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to testify and thereby try to set the record straight on a number of important points. Because I expect the committee has many questions, I will keep this statement brief. First, in the years that I provided outside accounting and bookkeeping services for Jeffrey Epstein, I was not aware of the terrible and unforgivable things that he did to women and girls. My relationship with Epstein was strictly on a professional level. We did not interact socially, and I never attended any of his parties or his social functions. While Epstein was alive, I never observed any sexual abuse or trafficking of women and never received a complaint either by one of Epstein's victims or anyone else of such abuse or trafficking. Epstein told me that his 2006 arrest was a mistake, that he did not know the woman was underage, and that nothing like that would happen again. I believed him at the time and never saw what appeared to be a minor in his presence. Had I learned of any of his horrific behavior, I would have quit work immediately. Second, in the work that I performed on behalf of Epstein or his companies, I did not see anything that suggested to me that Epstein was abusing or trafficking women or otherwise acting unlawfully. I worked with other accountants and bookkeepers to track spending on Epstein's properties and other assets, and in the few years before Epstein's death, I also tracked his investments. With homes in the Virgin Islands, New York, Palm Beach, Paris, and New Mexico, and with several planes and a helicopter, Epstein had substantial yearly expenditures and a large staff. We tracked the expenditures as meticulously as possible, including gifts by Epstein to women and men. The gifts represent a very small fraction of Epstein's spending. I did not see them as red flags for abuse or trafficking. Third, some media sources have reported that Epstein used corporate structures and cash to conceal his identity and hide his sexual abuse and trafficking. Based on my experience and conversations with financial officers for family offices, the use of limited liability companies by wealthy individuals to hold assets such as real estate or major assets like airplanes and helicopters is completely standard practice. I had no role in setting up any of Epstein's companies, but did not view them as improper or suspicious. Like all expenditures, we tried to closely track the use of cash at Epstein's properties, and where backup was missing, we treated cash and other expenditures as gifts by Epstein and reported them when appropriate on Epstein's gift tax returns. Finally, I agreed to serve as co-executor of Epstein's estate. By the time of Epstein's death, I had learned of the harm that he had caused to so many women and thought that my knowledge of Epstein's holdings would make me better prepared to alleviate some of their suffering. One of the first things my co-executor and I did was set up the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, which resolved claims by over 130 women in a confidential manner, without limits as to their recovery and without any decision-making by the estate. We also settled nearly 60 claims by Epstein's victims. I have done my best to balance my obligations as a fiduciary of the estate with the interest in providing legitimate compensation to Epstein's victims. For this work, I have been the subject of attacks by plaintiffs' lawyers and have had my reputation dragged through the mud. It has taken a tremendous toll on me and my family, but I continue to serve as co-executor because I believe it is the right thing to do. I was not aware of the nature or extent of Epstein's abuse of so many women until after Epstein's death. However, it pains me to think, and I deeply regret, that I may have unknowingly assisted Epstein in any way. Thank you.
Thank you. The clock reads 10:11 a.m. and the majority's time will begin now. Mr. Khan, thank you for appearing here today. Can you tell us where you went to college?
I went to Syracuse University,
And what degree did you graduate with?
an accounting degree.
And when did you join, or when did you first become employed with Mr. Epstein?
I interviewed for a job with Epstein in October of 2005.
And when did you first meet Mr. Epstein?
I met him in October of 2005.
What did you understand Mr. Epstein's job to be at the time that you started working with him?
I understood that he was providing financial, tax, and estate planning to clients.
During your time working with Mr. Epstein, did you develop a personal relationship with him outside of work?
Mr. Epstein and I never socialized. I did not have a personal relationship with Epstein, and my dealings with Epstein were quite infrequent. I would typically meet with him about every 3 weeks for anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes. And our conversations were 90% regarding, the questions I brought in and was looking to get answered regarding his accounting and financial situation.
And how long did you work for Mr. Epstein?
I worked from October 2005 through the date that Epstein was incarcerated, and then I continued to serve as co-executive.
And when did you officially become co-executor of Mr. Epstein's estate?
I believe that occurred in August 2019.
And sorry to jump around in the timeline here, but in 2005, Mr. Epstein was, the investigation into Mr. Epstein in Florida began. I know you started your employment with Mr. Epstein in 2005. Prior to his arrest in 2006, were you aware of any investigations into Mr. Epstein?
I was not aware of any investigations, nor was I aware of the fact that Epstein was arrested. I found out about Epstein's legal problems when we had a discussion in 2008.
And what did you discuss?
Epstein said he wanted to talk with me and mentioned that he was having legal problems in Florida. And he mentioned that he was with a woman that turned out to be a minor and that he was going to be charged with soliciting a minor for prostitution. Epstein then told me that it was a mistake that he was with this minor and that it would never happen again.
And when Mr. Epstein informed you of his legal problems and that he had been with a minor, were you surprised by that fact?
Yeah, I was surprised. I've just been working for this man for a few years. So it was shocking to me, and it was quite upsetting.
And did you discuss how his legal problems and subsequent incarceration would affect his financial accounting?
Well, at the time, Epstein wanted to continue to employ everyone. He didn't want to fire people. And I know at the time, everyone that continued working for him received a pay cut of, I believe, 10%.
And I think you briefly touched on this, but after learning of Mr. Epstein's legal troubles, you, of course, ultimately decided to continue your employment with Mr. Epstein. Did you ever consider leaving or discuss leaving your
Yes.
employment?
Yes, 100%. In hindsight, I regret that I relied on Epstein's word that this would never happen again. And I believe at the time, we were in the middle of a financial crisis and I had a family to support. So I made the wrong decision in working for him, because I later learned as co-executor that Epstein continued to abuse hundreds of minors and adults. So I made an improper decision.
Did you suspect that he was ever trafficking women, sex trafficking women, or abusing women or girls in any way?
No, I never suspected any of that.
Did anyone in Mr. Epstein's orbit ever express concern to you about Mr. Epstein and his dealings with women before his 2008 conviction?
I never saw minors in the presence of Epstein. On my visits every 3 weeks when Epstein was in town, no woman has ever come to me and said that she was in danger, that she was being sexually abused or sexually trafficked.
When did you become aware that Mr. Epstein had to register as a sex offender following his arrest and incarceration in 2008?
I believe I became aware, I assume, after, I guess, after he was to be released from jail.
When did you first meet Ghislaine Maxwell?
I met Maxwell probably within the first, I'd say, 2 months of working for Epstein.
And throughout your relationship or employment with Mr. Epstein and working with Ms. Maxwell, did her role as sort of a chief of staff or a number two to Mr. Epstein, did that ever change?
Yeah, I believe that she was no longer involved in Epstein's day-to-day operations sometime in, I want to say, the 2009 to 10 range.
Did you ever have the impression that Ms. Maxwell and Mr. Epstein had a romantic relationship with each other?
I was never aware of Epstein's romantic relationships, but there was, I'd say, office chatter, or people said that at one point in time they did have a romantic relationship, but I can't say I know that with confidence.
Did Ghislaine Maxwell ever try to introduce you to any women or girls during her time in Mr. Epstein's orbit?
No.
How did Mr. Epstein act around women in your presence?
I didn't see anything out of the ordinary.
Did you ever witness Mr. Epstein receive a massage from any woman or girl?
No,
Did you ever witness Mr. Epstein have sexual contact of any kind with a young woman or girl?
no,
Did anyone check the date of births of any employees on the payroll? Did you ever have any sexual contact with any young woman or girl introduced to you by Epstein or Maxwell?
no.
We will conclude our first hour there and go off the record.
We are on the record. Mr. Khan, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to ask the court reporter to mark as Exhibit A an email. It's a thread initiated by you to Mr. Epstein.
It says, I know it has been a challenging week. I support you 100%. If there's anything I can do for you, please let me know.
And the email is sent by you to Mr. Epstein, correct?
Yes,
So I'll represent to you that Mr. Epstein was arrested on July 23rd, 2006.
Okay.
Is there anything you could have been referring to in that email other than his arrest?
I don't recall this email, so it's hard for me to make comment on what I knew.
It appears from this communication that you've actually learned of Mr. Epstein's arrest in July of 2006 rather than 2008, as you testified in the previous round.
That's not correct. I testified to what I recall to a conversation I had in 2008. This email does not say, I know that you were arrested and it's been a challenging week. It says, I know it's been a challenging week and I support you. It does not say in this email, I know you were arrested. So I'm not going to testify to that.
I would like to return to the subject of the point in time when you started working for Mr. Epstein. You were asked during the previous round about Mr. Epstein's net worth, and I wanted to return to that topic as well.
I do know he had hundreds of millions of dollars in stocks and bonds and investments. And I do know, as serving as co-executor, that when we filed his Form 706 estate tax return, it had somewhere between 500 and 600 million in assets.
During the period of time that Mr. Epstein employed you, what were the sources of his wealth?
Epstein earned fees from his clients for financial, tax, and estate planning. Epstein made investments, so he had interest, dividends, made real estate investments, so he had passive income. That's what I understand the sources of his income to be.
If we could talk about the clients for a few minutes. How many clients did Mr. Epstein have?
Somewhere between 5 and 10 clients. The first client that paid fees that I'm aware of is Les Wexner. The next client that paid fees was either Glenn Dubin individually or his entity, Highbridge Capital. The next client was an individual named Steven Sinofsky. I believe Rothschild paid fees. Ariana Rothschild, or one of her affiliated entities. And Leon Black, I believe, was the fifth. Glenn Dubin, I remember seeing income come in for the sale of Highbridge. I don't recall a specific amount. I think it was somewhere between $15 and $25 million.
And how much did Mr. Black pay him?
I don't recall the exact amount. I believe it was somewhere in the range of $150 million.
I'd like to shift gears and talk a little bit more about 301 East 66th Street, the building where I understand you had an office for a period of time.
Some of his assistants did have apartments. I believe Sarah Kellen had an apartment. I believe Nadia Marcinkova had an apartment. I believe at one point in time, Svetlana had an apartment.
So it's fair to say that he covered the cost of housing for the people who occupied those units?
Yes, with a few exceptions.
Were any of them, to your understanding, above the age of 30? And what was your understanding as to the nature of their relationship to Jeffrey Epstein?
Some of the women that were mentioned were assistants that worked for Epstein.
Did you ever understand that Jeffrey Epstein was engaging in sexual activity with any of those women?
I was not aware of Epstein's personal and sexual relationships.
Did you ever travel on Mr. Epstein's plane?
Yes, on 2 occasions, I traveled on Epstein's plane.
And on those 2 trips, who else was on the plane with you?
On the first plane ride, it was Darren Endyke, myself, Epstein, and I believe Sarah Kellen, plus the 2 pilots. I never saw a transaction in Epstein's books and records that said payment for sex, or I don't recall ever seeing any payments that said, for massages. So there was never anything in his ledger that alluded to that, if that's what you're asking.
And by 2019, is that when you started to learn about the extent of his crimes?
When the Miami Herald article came out, it was alarming because there was a lot more depth to
Yeah.
what took place in 2008.
Did you ever withdraw cash for Jeffrey Epstein to pay for services or pay Jeffrey?
Not that I recall.
Were you ever in any financial transactions involving public figures such as politicians, political leaders, or heads of state?
The only thing that comes to mind is that I believe Epstein invested in an entity, or I don't even know if it was his partner or what the original origins of, but with Ehud Barak.
And then were you aware of any financial transactions while you were employed there involving Jeffrey Epstein and the Trump family, either before you'd been employed or after?
Never aware of any transactions between Epstein and the Trump family.
I'm Ro Khanna. Thank you for coming. Is it true that Jane Doe 4 received a financial settlement directly from the estate? Is it true that she received a financial settlement directly from the estate?
I believe that Jane Doe 4 received a settlement via mediation with the estate, I believe in 2025. There were 136 claimants that were paid over $121 million.
Would you say it's fair to say that there are hundreds of women who were abused or raped or trafficked?
I don't agree with the statement that there were 1,000 plus survivors. My understanding is that the Epstein Victims Compensation Program gave out awards to 136 women. The estate then settled mediation or individually with another 59 individuals, which I believe is 195. I believe, and there's allegations that maybe there's another 50 women out there in my belief. So I'd say the number is probably somewhere in the 250 range, not 1,000.
And what about, would you say it's fair to say that there were other men involved either in trafficking, raping, abusing, or participating in the abuse of these girls other than Maxwell and Epstein?
We'll go back on the record. Mr. Khan, and 1:02 p.m. Mr. Khan, towards the end of the last hour, there were discussions about the estate settlement fund for victims and survivors of the crimes of Mr. Epstein, and it was mentioned that there were carve-outs for other individuals. Could you please inform us of who those individuals are that were carved out?
Yes. My recollection is that from the Epstein Victims Compensation Program, I'm aware of 2 carve-outs. There may have been a few more, but these are the 2 that I'm aware of. One was Alan Dershowitz, and the other carve-out was Prince Andrew. Regarding the mediation, there were 2 additional carve-outs. One was Leon Black, and the other was Jess Staley.
And just for clarity, could you briefly explain what it means that these individuals were carved out?
Yes. So when I was alluding to the release from the estate's perspective as fiduciaries, us wanting as broad a release as possible, because we did not want an individual that worked for Epstein or someone that may have been indemnified to later come back to us for legal fees. We wanted as much coverage as possible so that we could have finality. The victims that chose to carve out these individuals, I don't believe were meant to be covered, but maybe they were. I think that the individuals wanted there just to be 100% clarity that these individual names that were carved out were not part of the release.
Understood. Switching gears a little bit now, at HBRK, Harry Beller was a part of that entity, is that correct?
Yes,
And Mr. Beller, I believe you testified earlier, his role was that he handled a lot of the derivatives and investment accounts for Mr. Epstein. Is that correct?
yes.
And when did Mr. Beller leave HBRK?
I believe Mr. Harry Beller left employment in May of 2014.
And do you know why Mr. Beller left in May of 2014?
As I testified earlier, I believe to the minority, Mr. Beller was predominantly involved in working on investments for Les Wexner, and in addition to Epstein. But at the time, from 2000, I don't recall the exact date when Mr. Wexner and Epstein terminated their relationship, but let's just say approximately 2008, the amount of transactions and volume that Mr. Beller was working on had slowed down. So at that point in time, Epstein was just working predominantly on, I'm sorry, at that point in time, Mr. Beller was working just on Epstein stuff, and there was not a lot of work. And Epstein did not think that he was getting good value for paying Mr. Beller's compensation package, and decided that he was going to no longer pay for his services.
And you mentioned that the business relationship between Mr. Wexner and Mr. Epstein ended in the 2000s. You didn't know exactly when that was. Do you know why that relationship ended?
I do not know why it ended.
And whose decision was it for Mr. Beller to no longer be employed with HBRK?
It was Epstein's decision.
And was that decision to terminate Mr. Beller, is that decision made with you?
I was not part of the decision. I would have liked Harry Beller to stay employed and continue to work together. It was Epstein's sole decision.
And at that point, how did your role change after the departure of Mr. Beller?
Well, as I testified earlier, Mr. Beller was working on clients' investments and stocks and options derivatives and doing the accounting for it, as well as tracking Epstein's assets and investments. The accounting work that continued thereafter was not work that I took on. Another accountant for Epstein did that work. What I picked up from Mr. Harry Beller's work was I was involved with tracking Epstein's stocks and bonds and reporting to him on a monthly basis the value of those assets.
And who was the other accountant that picked up the lion's share of the other work?
A woman by the name of Jeannie Brennan, who worked out of the St. Thomas office.
Are you aware of how long Miss Brennan worked for Mr. Epstein?
I don't recall how long she worked. I know that in 2005, when I began working for New York Strategy Group, she was already working for Epstein.
And was there any type of agreement when Mr. Beller left HBRK that governed his departure from the entity?
I believe he received a severance payment. Maybe he was on salary for a period of time. I don't recall the amount or the details of that severance.
Was the entity, did you take sole ownership or management of the entity at that point?
At that point in time, I believe the year was 2014, when we filed our tax return for the 2014 tax year. I was the 100% owner of HBRK.
How did HBRK's business change with the departure of Mr. Beller?
I don't think it changed much because majority of the work that Bella was focused on had already diminished over the years with Mr. Wexner no longer being a client of Epstein's. So as I said before, I picked up a portion of it and Jeannie Brennan picked up a portion, but HBRK still continued to do accounting and bookkeeping services on behalf of Epstein and a number of his other entities.
And how well would you say that you know Mr. Beller?
At the time that we worked together, we had, both a personal and work relationship
By personal relationship, what does that mean?
that we might see each other outside of work.
Social events, thing of that nature?
I only recall one or two circumstances, but we were friendly and we are both Jewish, so during certain Jewish holidays, we wish each other a Happy New Year or, speak along those lines. So I only remember one or two events outside of work, but we had a friendly relationship, more than just coworkers.
Do you still have a relationship with Mr. Beller?
Unfortunately not.
You say unfortunately not. Why do you still not have a relationship with Mr. Beller?
Because when I took on the role of co-executor, and there were many lawsuits that occurred, and I believe that Harry Beller was subpoenaed, and part of it, it just made it a little challenging for us to continue to communicate.
Reporting indicates that Mr. Beller made some large cash transactions over a series of months towards the end of his employment with Mr. Epstein. Are you aware of Mr. Beller's large cash transactions?
I'm aware that Mr. Beller had signatory authority for Epstein's accounts at JP Morgan and then Deutsche Bank. And I'm aware that Mr. Beller withdrew cash at times. I'm not familiar with any particular transactions.
Reporting indicates, based off legal documents in the 2022 U.S. Virgin Islands lawsuit against JP Morgan, that under the span of 18 months, there were checks cashed for approximately $800,000. Are you familiar with that figure for that occurring?
I'm not familiar with the figure, but could you repeat the time frame that it was reported, $800,000, please?
It was around the time of Mr. Beller's departure from HBRK, so I believe that would be 2014. These figures were found out as part of the 2022 U.S. Virgin Island lawsuit against JP Morgan, and the SARs that were unsealed as part of that case showed that in under 18 months, Mr. Beller had cash checks for approximately $800,000. As the personal accountant to Mr. Epstein, were you aware of the frequent cash withdrawals made by Epstein-related entities?
I am aware that when Harry Beller was a signatory, he withdrew cash.
Would you also provide cash for Mr. Epstein to keep in his New York townhome? Is there a certain increment of cash that you would often supply Mr. Epstein with when you would meet with him at these 3-week intervals?
The amounts that I recall from the last few years of working for Epstein was typically $6,000 that I would bring him approximately every 3 weeks.
Are you aware that there was a pattern of withdrawals of cash for exactly $9,800?
I was not aware of the amounts or the cadence of withdrawals. I was not involved in the process.
Are you aware of what the reporting threshold is for cash withdrawals?
No,
You're not aware of a $10,000 figure being an amount that sends flags and reports to the Department of the Treasury?
no, I'm not aware.
You think it's suspicious that $9,800 was consistently withdrawn out of accounts related to Mr. Epstein?
I can't make judgment. I wasn't involved in the process.
Looking back with your knowledge as you sit here today, do any of these payments or withdrawals concern or raise flags for you now?
Yes, 100%. Looking back with what I know today as co-executor, I should have never have trusted Epstein on anything he said. So I regret many decisions I made and having trust in his explanations to me, knowing what I know now and all the terrible things he did to so many innocent women.
Did you receive any loans from Mr. Epstein?
Yes, I received loans from Epstein over the years that I worked for him. Probably 3 or 4.
And what was the total amount of those 3 to 4 loans?
Approximately $3 million.
Are you aware of any other beneficiaries of that butterfly trust?
I think was a beneficiary. I think Sarah Kellen was a beneficiary. I think Karina Shuliak was a beneficiary. I think Sue Hamlin was a beneficiary.
You mentioned previously during this hour that knowing what you know now as co-executor of the estate, with reviewing documents that you should have never trusted Mr. Epstein, what exactly have you learned to make you feel that way or believe that?
Epstein abused hundreds of women. And at that point in time, if he was abusing hundreds of women, I couldn't trust anything he said to me because he told me at that point in time that he was never going to do this again. So if I knew now what I knew, let me rephrase that. If I knew back then that Epstein was not keeping his word and not honest and abusing women, I would have left work and reported him to the authorities.
Go back on the record. I would like to refer you back, if I could, to what was marked previously as Exhibit D. Dear Mr. Khan, thank you for your help with the university application, a sponsorship letter that says you're willing to pay for my tuition on the terms that I'll be working for you in the future, a full scholarship, parentheses, a fake one, obviously. And in that email, you don't raise any concerns about the reference to a fake scholarship in the prior email, right?
Yes, it's correct that I don't make a reference to a fake scholarship because I would never write such a letter.
It's also my understanding that J.P. Morgan Chase dropped Mr. Epstein as a client in 2013. Is that right?
Yes,
What is your understanding as to why J.P. Morgan dropped him?
the transition from J.P. Morgan to Deutsche Bank happened quite seamlessly. It was the same account rep that went from J.P. Morgan.
In November of 2018, the Miami Herald published a series of articles about Jeffrey Epstein. Did that series cause you concern?
Yes, it did cause me concern.
It's been reported that in the wake of the Miami Herald series, additional banks, including Deutsche, dropped Mr. Epstein as a client. Is that right?
Yes,
It is my understanding that Jeffrey Epstein also bought gifts for women on various occasions. Were you aware of that?
I was aware that Jeffrey Epstein bought gifts for women, men, and scientists and all sorts of individuals, not just women.
Were you ever aware of Jeffrey Epstein buying lingerie or sex toys for women?
No.
I'm going to shift gears to a different topic now. It's been reported in the Wall Street Journal and I believe elsewhere that you had a role with respect to marriages that took place between certain women connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Is that right?
I never played a role in any couples and their marriage. I never committed immigration fraud. I will tell you, in hindsight, I regret writing this letter because I now know that I unknowingly contributed to these women's pain and suffering. But this was not me participating in immigration fraud.
How many entities did Jeffrey Epstein own?
20 to 30 entities. There was no financial scaffolding. I don't even know what that term means. There was no reason to hide anything. Everything was reported on the books and records.
I'd just like to quickly walk through some of those specific entities that
Certainly.
we had an interest in. The first being Southern Trust Company. What was Southern Trust?
Southern Trust was the entity that Epstein used for his financial, tax, and estate planning. It was a U.S. Virgin Islands entity.
And did Southern Trust ever make payments to women?
Not that I'm aware of.
The Butterfly Trust we spoke about earlier, and I know you've answered questions regarding that entity. What was its purpose?
I don't know what its purpose was, but the Butterfly Trust, as I testified to earlier, was a pour-over trust from an investment that Epstein made, and the proceeds from that investment went to the Butterfly Trusts, whereby I was a trustee for a period of time, and then I was not a trustee for many years.
Did the Butterfly Trust make payments to women?
Yes.
And did you handle those payments?
Again, I think this is another area that was misreported on. I believe that it was reported that I were responsible for millions of dollars for payments to women from the Butterfly Trust. I think the Butterfly Trust only had approximately $1 million of distributions, number one, and I was a trustee for a portion of time, probably for less than half of those distributions. So yes, at times, as trustee, I made distributions based on the beneficiaries in that trust, yes.
And then LSJE LLC.
LSJE LLC was the entity that paid the bills for Epstein's two islands, LSJ and GSJ.
And did LSJE ever make payments to women?
Yes, I believe that improper payments were made to women from that entity. And what I mean by that is, for whatever reason, I don't know, Epstein asked to make a payment from that entity. It was incorrect. And because it was on an entity, LSJE LLC, that was not a tax reporting entity, we were forced to make journal entries and take those personal expenses and put it on his personal books and records so that it could be properly reflected on his gift tax return.
And then, as I understand it, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Epstein also had a personal account at Deutsche Bank in his own name. Is that right?
Yes, Epstein had a personal account.
And did he make payments to women out of that account?
Yes.
I think that's all helpful. I think the question arises if, as you've told us, each of these entities was set up to serve a specific purpose, and as I understand the goal of efficiency, why were payments being made to women from several different entities, which, as I understand, were designed to serve different purposes?
Well, I'll speak first to the trust. The Butterfly Trust had no specific purpose. It was a trust that Epstein set up for the benefit of whoever the beneficiaries are. So I take Butterfly Trust out of that. In the three entities we went through, I don't believe that Southern Trust ever paid women. And in the example of LSJ, I am telling you that I believe Epstein made handfuls of payments improperly to women from that entity. Why he chose to do that, I don't know. But I do know, as his accountant, and my goal and desire of keeping meticulous books and records, we quickly journal entered those entries into Epstein's personal QuickBooks account so we could properly record for his gift taxes. So from what you asked, it appears that there was one entity that he improperly paid women from other than his personal account.
When you say improperly, can you explain what you mean?
I mean by improperly meaning that it was a personal expense. It had nothing to do. I don't want to misspeak. It possibly could have been. Again, I never traveled with Epstein, so I don't know if he was paying a woman for work she did at that property. Maybe he had a party and this woman was a server. But if that was 1 or 2 times, maybe that's okay. But if it was 20 or 30 transactions, that doesn't seem to be the case. So we took all those. I'm not saying the payments were improper. I'm just saying the payment should have been from his personal books and records, because that's where he made his personal payments. And that is where that's the entity we use to report his gift tax reporting.
We can go off the record.
Okay, we will go back on the record. It is 3:15 p.m. Mr. Khan, in the previous hour, I believe you touched a little bit on Mr. Epstein's banking relationships, and I just want to go back through some of that just so that the record is clear. JP Morgan Chase was the primary bank until they dropped Mr. Epstein in approximately 2013. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And can you just restate the reasons for JP Morgan dropping Mr. Epstein as a client?
I believe what I testified to earlier was I did not know the reasons why JP Morgan dropped Epstein as a client.
Have you subsequently learned any reasons for why JP Morgan dropped Mr. Epstein?
Possibly as co-executor, I learned that they were concerned about him being charged with soliciting a minor, and they were concerned about cash withdrawals. But a lot of the reporting, I'm not sure what to believe and what not to believe. I don't know what's accurate, but I did hear they dropped him because of suspicious cash withdrawals, and I believe they were concerned. I think I'm saying this in context of just clearly that maybe I read reports that he was the only reason the bank stayed on with Epstein, but I don't know what's accurate and what's not accurate.
And following JP Morgan dropping Mr. Epstein, which banks did Mr. Epstein primarily move over to?
Epstein moved pretty seamlessly from JP Morgan to Deutsche Bank for his main banking relationship.
Did most of his entities also move to Deutsche Bank for their banking relationships?
Yes.
Did you play any role in finding a new bank for Mr. Epstein at this time?
In 2014, I was not involved with Epstein's move from JP Morgan to Deutsche Bank.
Who would have been involved in that?
I don't know if anyone other than Epstein was involved. As I testified earlier, Paul Morris, who was Epstein's account rep at JP Morgan, had moved over to Deutsche Bank, I believe prior to him being dropped. I don't know how much before. And then when Epstein was leaving JP Morgan, he took in Epstein's accounts at Deutsche Bank.
And how long did Mr. Epstein bank with Deutsche Bank?
I believe he banked from 2014 and Deutsche Bank, I believe, sometime in November or December of 2008, decided to terminate their relationship with Epstein.
2018.
Thank you. In November or December 2018, decided to terminate their relationship. However, for a handful or so accounts, they allowed us some time to find a new banking. So what I'm testifying to say is that the last bank account at Deutsche Bank might not have been closed until March or April of 2019.
And at which point did you take on a more prominent role in the banking activities of Mr. Epstein?
Well, after Deutsche Bank had dropped Epstein, he had asked if I could assist in trying to find him a bank account. At the time, as I testified to earlier, we had 20 or so entities with probably 10 or so payrolls, and I was concerned about making sure that staff was paid and bills were paid. At that point in time, I live on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and I went to two local branches, two brokerage accounts that are a block away from each other, Fidelity Brokerage and Charles Schwab, and I believe we opened up brokerage accounts at each of those institutions. And this was, I don't recall the time frame, sometime probably in March or April of, or maybe April, or sometime in the first or second quarter of 2019.
At this point in time, did you move any of Mr. Epstein's money into your own personal accounts?
My own personal account? No.
Are you aware of Mr. Endyke moving any of Mr. Epstein's money into his own personal accounts?
I'm not aware, but I can't say that with certainty. I don't know.
And you testified, actually, let me go back for a second. Over the course of your time working for Mr. Epstein, can you provide a total number of bank accounts in which you would have had?
Richard Conley personally?
No, of Mr. Epstein had.
A total number of accounts at all institutions?
Correct.
I would say that his main banking relationship would have somewhere between what I was describing before, all of his entities, planes, personal investments, somewhere between 25 to 30. And I know he had one account in the U.S. Virgin Islands. That was the first bank. I believe he had a local account in Palm Beach for a period of time. Most of these local accounts were for the purposes of the house managers, so they could access checks. And I believe he had a local account in New Mexico. So I would say the most accounts he ever had at any given time was about 30, approximately.
How many accounts did Mr. Epstein maintain, bank accounts did Mr. Epstein maintain overseas?
The only accounts that I'm aware that Epstein had overseas were his Paris accounts, which I am not 100% certain whether they were in the name of Epstein or the local attorney. I think some of them were in Epstein's name, because I do recall his FBARs, which is financial reporting we're required to do with his personal return, that he had to state the highest value. So he must have had a few accounts in his name, but they were all, my understanding is his accounts were all from Paris, and they related to the support of his home there.
Mr. Epstein maintained any bank accounts in Switzerland,
Not that I'm aware of.
Grand Cayman Islands?
Not that I'm aware of.
Did Mr. Epstein ever hold any Bitcoin or other digital assets?
Not that I'm aware of.
Going back to the Paris bank, do you know the name of that bank?
I believe there were a few banks. I think it was maybe BNP Paribas. And then the minority was talking about an HSBC account. I don't know if that's accurate, but they were talking about that earlier. And there may have been one other. I don't recall.
You mentioned earlier, I believe, around the earlier time frame of you coming into employment with Mr. Epstein and moving towards his problems with JP Morgan, he had problems getting credit cards. Is that accurate?
When JP Morgan dropped Epstein, we struggled to get credit cards, and I don't know the particular reason, but I believe it's one of two things. One, Epstein spent a lot of money on an annual basis and typically wanted credit lines of $300,000-400,000 because he wanted to give out 10 or 15 credit cards to employees. And I believe that banks wanted full-time, they didn't want to provide just credit card services for that amount of credit without a full-time banking relationship. And Epstein was already settled at Deutsche Bank, so he wasn't looking to move over his banking relationship. And the other reason, and maybe I'm making an inference, is that maybe he had trouble with his credit cards because of his 2008, incident.
And outside of just the plain property management staff, approximately how many other individuals would have access to Mr. Epstein's credit cards, whether that be direct access to his own account or an account in their name that maybe he paid for?
I'm not sure I'm understanding you. Are you asking how many credit cards were outstanding or how many people would,
How many people would have a credit card
other than property
other
managers?
than the property
What
managers,
about the pilots?
pilots,
Including
Other-
pilots, or are you just
including-
asking for assistance?
including pilots, assistants, other women associated with other businesses, etc.?
I believe, and again, I don't recall that much about the JP Morgan credit cards, but I believe back then we probably had between American Express and I don't know if JP Morgan was Master or Visa, but between JP Morgan and American Express, there were probably 15 or so credit cards outstanding.
And who were they besides the property managers?
They were the pilots. When you use the word property managers, are you referring to also staff of the properties?
Yes, outside of staff property.
Outside of property staff, it was the pilots. I think at one point in time, Maxwell had a credit card. And his assistants, I would assume. That would be what gets me to 15 in my head.
Did any other women associated with other entities have credit cards paid for by Mr. Epstein?
I apologize, I'm not sure I'm understanding your question. When you say other credit cards, are you inferring that he's paying their personal credit cards?
Correct.
Not that I'm aware of. I believe that Epstein, for assistants that made purchases on behalf of Epstein and also made personal purchases, I believe that all the credit cards were originating from Epstein.
And did you track all of Mr. Epstein's credit card payments?
No, that was an area that I was not involved in. That was Bella Klein that handled credit cards, which is, each month when a credit card statement came, Bella Klein would communicate with the individual, whether it was a property manager, assistant, or pilot, and request backup for each one of the charges. And then she would take that backup with the explanation and input that into QuickBooks.
Did you have access to any of the expense reports generated by the use of those credit cards? Or is that also Ms. Klein?
I was not restricted if I wanted to see the report, but I never looked at the reports. It was not something that I worked on. So to answer your question, yes, I had access. There were no restrictions, but it was not something that I worked on.
Then just to be clear, the property managers at the Palm Beach residence, Little St. James residence, the New York residence, and the Zorro Ranch residence all had credit cards that they could use on behalf of Mr. Epstein
I believe Paris as well.
and Paris.
Yes. Now, depending on the property managers, yes, and then depending on how much work some of the other individuals did, there might be additional credit cards given to others at that property.
We discussed, I believe, much earlier in the day that Mr. Epstein was at one point in either late 2018 or 2019 looking to buy a property in Morocco. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
And is it fair to say that Mr. Epstein had already set aside the funds to pay for, I know he didn't ultimately end up paying for that house, but he had the funds set up to pay for that purchase?
Just to clarify a little bit, the property that Epstein was pursuing in Morocco, I don't know if the ultimate property that he was pursuing, sorry to go back. Epstein, in a previous meeting with me sometime in 2018 or 19, showed Endyke and I a picture of a home and said, I'd like to buy this home one day. So I knew he was pursuing a property. I don't know if the property that he made an initial payment to the broker for was that same property, but I knew Epstein had an interest in Morocco, and I knew he had visited there previous times. The Charles Schwab account where the wire came out of had plenty of funds in the account. I believe the account, I don't know which account in particular it came out of. I know he had 3 accounts there at the time and probably had, I don't know, $50 to $70 million among the 3 accounts. But I will say, I did see an article that alluded to the fact that Epstein made a wire, and then we asked for the wire to be returned, which is correct. And I believe that wire was maybe 2 days before his arrest, somewhere in that range. Or I don't know, maybe it was a week before. He retracted that wire. He then asked for a second wire to be made, and I believe it was reported on that he didn't have the funds in the account, which I don't believe is correct. The bank would have never allowed money to go to Switzerland without funds in the account. Maybe it didn't come back in clear, but Epstein held stocks and securities and cash. He had plenty of funds in the account, so I don't believe that reporting was accurate. But then after Epstein was incarcerated, let me rephrase that. One wire was made, it was retracted, and then 2 or 3 days before Epstein's arrest, he made a second wire. And after his incarceration, he requested that that wire be returned back to Charles Schwab, or maybe I personally made the request. He didn't want to purchase that home anymore, and the money was returned, and there's no money in Switzerland, and all the money went back to Charles Schwab.
Are you aware of if Morocco has any extradition treaty with the United States?
I'm not aware of which countries have extradition.
Did Mr. Epstein ever mention countries with extradition treaties
That's
to you?
not something we ever spoke about.
Going to introduce as Majority Exhibit 4 an email. I'll wait a second until it is passed out.
Thank you.
This is an email with the Bates number of EFTA 02125060. The 2-line is redacted. It is from a Janine Brennan sent on Wednesday, October 30th, 2013. The subject line reads, "Heads up to expect a call from Mike Marvel." In the original message there at the bottom of the page. This is an email that appears to be from Miss Groff, as the signature line says, "Thanks so much, Leslie." Is that accurate?
Yes,
And just above that, the email states, and I quote, "Mike Marvel from Bank of America will be calling to speak with Jeffrey, but you need to connect the call to Rich Kahn. Rich has been speaking with Mike as, in quotation marks, Jeffrey. Please do not bother Jeffrey with this." Did you impersonate Mr. Epstein in speaking with Bank of America?
I don't recall this email, nor do I recall conversations with Mike Marvel from Bank of America.
Did you ever have discussions with Bank of America?
I believe, I thought I dealt with a woman by the name of Karen Weiss. I believe that Bank of America was the relationship where Leon Black had his accounts. And maybe there was conversations between Epstein and Black in regards to Epstein setting up accounts, but that's my only recollection of dealing with Bank of America.
I will introduce as Majority Exhibit 5, another email. I'll give a moment for that to get passed around.
Thank you.
This is an email Bates stamped EFTA 02120271. The to line is Leslie Groff. The from line is Richard Kahn. It was sent on Wednesday, November 27th, 2013. Subject line reads Mike Marvel, Bank of America. It appears that the signature line has your name, Richard Kahn. Is that correct?
Yes,
The email says, and I quote, "I left him a message as if I was JEE, left a redacted number for him to call. If he does, please forward to me. Thanks." JEE, is that often referred to as Mr. Epstein?
yes, J.E. Is Epstein.
And did you call Bank of America impersonating Mr. Epstein?
I don't recall the particular conversation as we sit here today, but it looks like from this email, that's what it says.
Would you often impersonate Mr. Epstein when dealing with entities or banking institutions?
No,
Can you recall any other times in which you would have impersonated Mr. Epstein in
No.
dealing with his matters?
no.
Do you recall impersonating Mr. Epstein in this?
I don't recall impersonating Epstein ever, but the email says I left him a message as if I was JEE. So those are my words, but I don't recall a conversation. It's possible it happened. I wrote something, but I don't recall the conversation.
Would you have ever done that without Mr. Epstein's permission or?
I would never, my inference from this email is that Epstein had asked me to speak to the bank on his behalf. I would have never impersonated anyone without their permission, so. But I don't recall this fact pattern, but I could tell you that I never impersonated anyone unless Epstein asked me to say, call the bank and say you're Jeffrey, but I don't recall the conversation.
Are there any other times when Mr. Epstein explicitly told you to call and discuss matters as if you were Mr. Epstein himself?
Not that I recall.
Switching gears a little bit, in the previous hour, some of the entities owned by Mr. Epstein were discussed. I believe you testified last hour that you believed every single entity was a legitimate entity. Is that a correct characterization of your testimony?
Yes,
And you had no concern over any of these entities whatsoever?
yes, I had no concern over any entities.
Looking back with the subsequent knowledge you have since learned? Do any of these entities present any red flags to you sitting here today?
Looking back as co-executor and knowing what I know now, I still don't see any red flags with Epstein's entities.
A lot of Epstein's companies held pretty high cash balances. Was there a reason why they held such high balances?
If you don't mind, could you give me context to when you say his companies held cash balances? Epstein spent a lot of money from a lot of his entities, especially properties where he was doing construction. So if I'm understanding you correctly, if it was an entity that was a household and he was going to have bills and construction projects over the next 2 or 3 months, instead of sending wires every 2 weeks, we'd send a wire one time, possibly for $500,000 to pay for the next 3 or 4 months' expenses. But if you're referring to his brokerage accounts, Epstein made all of his stock and bond investments on his own. I never offered him advice, so I don't know what his thoughts were on investing in the market or other entities.
Were there any conversations or discussions about a maximum amount of money, to hold in any entity?
Not that I recall. You're asking the question, did XYZ entity have to hold $1 million in cash at a certain point in time?
Yes.
Not that I'm aware of, but I do know that sometimes banks, require companies to hold a certain amount of money in cash so that the banks could have the use of that money and pay very low interest rate. But I'm not aware of any arrangements like that.
Were there any discussions or conversations about a minimum balance to hold in any of these entities' accounts, with the understanding that, of course, banks often have thresholds, but outside of that?
I believe, whatever the bank would require, we would keep in order not to pay fees, but I'm not aware of minimum balances at all, no.
You recall the entity named Nautilus and Poplar?
Nautilus and Poplar, I believe they were title holding entities. I believe Poplar was for the Virgin Islands residents, Little St. James, and Nautilus, I think might have been New York title.
And were you the treasurer or otherwise affiliated with any of these entities?
I believe I was an officer for his entities, yes. For that entity, for the tree company entities, yes.
Do you recall the entity named Cyprus?
Yes, I believe Cyprus held title for his New Mexico property.
And were you an officer of Cyprus Inc.?
I believe at a certain point in time, I was the treasurer. I don't recall the dates.
And do you recall a entity named Maple Inc.?
Maple Inc., maybe Maple owned New York, maybe Nautilus owned Florida. I'm not sure, but Maple Inc. was another entity that was set up for the sole purpose of holding title to one of Epstein's residences, yes.
And were you an officer of Maple Inc.?
I believe so, at a certain point in time.
Are you familiar with a company named Laurel Inc.?
I believe Laurel Inc. was the title holding company for his Florida residence.
Were you an officer of Laurel Inc.?
I believe so.
And speaking about these title holding entities we just discussed, I believe you indicated you were an officer at one point or another with all of them. What was your role in being an officer for these title holding companies?
My role as an officer would be to make sure that the bills were paid, the property, in these title holding companies, that the property tax bills were paid and that they filed, timely tax returns.
Did these entities have any other obligations outside of the ones you just mentioned?
My understanding of these entities is that they were set up, they were USVI corporations, and they strictly held title to Epstein's residences, and the only bills that they paid on an annual basis were property taxes or maybe, some filing fees, but that's all I understood that these entities did.
Are you familiar with Gratitude America?
Yes,
And what is Gratitude America?
it is a U.S. Virgin Islands foundation that Epstein set up with the goal of giving money to scientific purposes as well as to the ideals of America.
Are you an officer or any otherwise way affiliated with Gratitude America?
Yes,
What was your role?
I believe I was treasurer, and at one point I was president as well.
And given those roles, what were your responsibilities with Gratitude America?
With Gratitude America, similar to the three entities we spoke about, my goal would be to make sure that Epstein was giving donations to 501c3 entities, to make sure that he was properly filing his tax returns, and making sure that the books and records were accurate.
Are you aware of any funds being paid by Gratitude America to any women for unrelated purposes than the stated purpose of the entity?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Are you familiar with MC2 model management?
Yes,
And what is MC2 model management?
it is not an Epstein-owned entity. However, it is an entity that was owned by Jean-Luc and I believe a few other partners. That was a modeling agency that Epstein gave a credit line to. Let me rephrase that. That Epstein backed a credit line. I believe they obtained a credit line from the bank and Epstein guaranteed it.
And how much was that guarantee?
I believe at one point it was up to $1 million.
And why did Mr. Epstein provide a guarantee to the modeling agency?
I don't know.
And who is Jean-Luc Brunel?
I believe he was one of the owners of MC2 modeling agency.
Are you aware of what Mr. Brunel's relationship was with Mr. Epstein?
At the time, I assumed they were friends. I didn't know their relationship, but subsequently I read articles that said that they were friends, and I saw recent articles that said Jean-Luc and him had a falling out. So
Did you ever meet Mr. Brunel?
I probably met him a handful of times, coming or going from a meeting, but we've never had any substantive conversation.
Did you ever process any payments from Mr. Epstein or his entities to Mr. Brunel or MC2 model management?
Process payments, meaning
Did you send any money in any form?
I believe at one point in time, Epstein asked if money can be sent on behalf of, it may have been Svetlana. That's all I recall.
Do you know what the purpose of the money for Svetlana was that was provided to MC2 model management?
No, I did not.
Do you have any concerns about Mr. Epstein's relationship with MC2 model management and the young women that were associated with it as well?
I never met the women from MC2 modeling agency. The extent of my relationship with MC2 was as Epstein's accountant when the credit line was extended to the agency. I was making sure that it was paid down and paid off over time. So my dealings were predominantly with a gentleman by the name of Jeff Fuller, who I believe was Jean-Luc's partner. And I would ask him the status of payments and make sure that they would be able to pay down the credit line so that Epstein didn't have to pay on that guarantee.
Are you familiar with Roadruck Investigations?
Yes,
And what is Roadruck Investigations?
I believe it's an entity that we used when we hired new individuals, employees, rather, I'm sorry, to run background checks.
And did you hire Roadruck Investigations to perform background checks on every new employee or new hire?
I believe so.
Was this PI firm used for any other purpose other than background checks on new hires?
I got the name of Roadruck from either Epstein or Endyke, so I don't know what their previous relationship was with this organization.
Are you familiar with the entity JEGE Inc.?
Yes.
And what is JEGE Inc.?
JEGE Inc. was an S corporation that was set up to hold Epstein's Boeing 727 aircraft.
Did it have any other purposes other than holding the Boeing 727 aircraft?
It held title to the aircraft and also paid the expenses on operating that aircraft.
Were you involved with JEGE Inc.?
I was involved in a bookkeeping capacity. I was involved if the pilots were doing renovations and they needed to pay for the work that was being put in place, making sure that the work was proper. So I would communicate with them on projects relating to the plane, but that was the extent of my involvement.
Is Mr. Epstein the owner of that entity?
Epstein owned 100% of that entity, yes.
Are you familiar with JEGE Inc. owned the 727? Is that correct?
Yes,
Mr. Epstein also had another aircraft. Is that correct?
I believe he had two planes at most times. He also had a Gulfstream, I think Gulfstream 2B originally, and then sold that and bought another Gulfstream, yes.
And which entity of Mr. Epstein's held the Gulfstream?
I believe originally the Gulfstream 2B was owned by Hyperion Air Inc., another S Corp. And when Epstein sold the Boeing and sold the Gulfstream 2B, he bought maybe a Gulfstream 4 or 5, I don't recall. I believe that was owned by JEGE LLC.
Mr. Epstein also owned a helicopter. Is that correct?
Yes,
And which entity held the helicopter?
Epstein owned many helicopters over the years. One of the first helicopters he owned, I believe, was owned by an entity by the name of Air Guilen Inc. When that helicopter was sold, I think he owned 3 or 4 helicopters over the years, and I believe some of the later helicopters were owned by Hyperion Air LLC.
A lot of these entities, they have similar names. You have JEGE Inc., JEGE LLC, Hyperion Air Inc., Hyperion LLC. What is the purpose for having entities that are named similarly but not being the exact same entity?
I don't know the process of how Epstein named his entities. Quite frankly, from my perspective, a lot of them were weird names, including the tree companies, but that's irrelevant for today. Epstein, what I do know is that Epstein held one asset in each entity. So for the time that Epstein owned 2 planes, they would never be held in the same entity. When Epstein owned 2 helicopters at the same time, they were always in separate entities. But I don't know the significance for why or how he named the entities.
Given your years of experience and expertise as an accountant, Do you find that strategy to have similarly named entities as strange?
I find nothing suspicious about having the same name of an entity. I mean, from working as an accountant with real estate developers and property owners, many times they'll call it ABC1, ABC2, ABC3, and they'll just keep continuing a name they like and adding a number for each property they buy. So I find nothing suspicious about that. No red flags.
Did Mr. Epstein own any boats or sea-bearing craft?
Yes, he owned a number of boats and jet skis at his U.S. Virgin Islands location, LSJ.
And which entities would hold those boats and jet skis?
His barge was held by an entity by the name of Michelle's Transportation, LLC. And he never owned a yacht. I think most of his boats were just to transport workers back and forth. They might have been owned, this might be the one circumstance where he did not put boats or aircraft in a separate LLC, but from my perspective, it wasn't significant in the fact that these boats, I don't think any boat that Epstein owned was more than $50,000 or $100,000.
And understanding that Mr. Epstein likely owned many cars over the time that you worked for him, which entities would have held the various vehicles that Mr. Epstein owned?
Epstein typically held his cars by the entity where the car was located. So, for example, in New Mexico, for a period of time, it was Zorro Development that operated the ranch. It then became Zorro Management. So those two entities owned his cars over time. In Florida, I think very early on, when I first started working, Epstein owned cars in his individual name, one or two cars. But thereafter, he owned it in the entity Neptune LLC. Little St. James, the cars were owned, I believe, I don't think there was, I mean, it was an island. I think there was only one car, and it was owned by his business, maybe Southern Trust or Financial Trust. New York would be the same. NES LLC would own, I think it was one or two vehicles in New York. And I believe the same goes for Paris.
And which entity in Paris?
I think the entity that Epstein held title to his property in Paris was an entity by the name of SCI. Was the name of a corporation that he held shares. I believe he was in a co-op there, owning multiple apartments. But I don't know if that entity held the cars or if he held them individually there. I don't recall.
Understood. Are you familiar with Zorro Trust?
Yes.
And what was the Zorro Trust?
Zorro Trust was the original entity that held title to the ranch. So before Epstein used the tree companies to hold title, he held title differently for all of his properties. And prior to, I believe Cyprus held title at Epstein's death. But prior to that, Zorro Trust held title to the ranch, and Zorro Development paid the bills, owned the cars, and did the operations. After that, title was held by Cypress Inc., and Zorro Management paid the bills.
Are you familiar with 116 East 65th Street LLC?
I believe that was the entity that Maxwell owned her townhouse in.
Do you have any role with that entity?
I had no role with the entity other than the fact that I testified earlier that I helped her organize her finances. So potentially that entity had some of her staff that were on payroll, and I may have helped her organize, her finances with and understand her payroll, but I had no involvement with that entity in setting it up.
And so that entity was owned by Miss Maxwell?
I believe so.
Are you familiar with EGC Capital LLC?
I don't know that entity.
Are you familiar with Forums LLC?
Yes.
And what is Forums LLC?
Forums LLC was an entity that was set up by Maxwell and funded by Epstein. And Forums LLC was involved in the 2005 Clinton Global Initiative. I believe that Forums had some sort of profit sharing with the entity that was putting that event together, which was called Publicis. I believe Publicis was producing the event, whatever that event was, I don't know. But Forums invested money and was in some sort of profit sharing agreement with Publicis. And I don't know anything more other than the fact that when I first began working with Epstein in late 2005 and later in 2006, I remember reviewing the financial statements from that event for the profit and loss of the Clinton Global Initiative.
Were there any other entities that were involved with the Clinton Global Initiative or Clinton Foundation?
I believe that Epstein made a $25,000 donation to one of Clinton's foundations in 2006.
Do you know which entity that came from?
I believe it was COUQ.
Are you familiar with J. Epstein and Company, Inc.?
I'm not that familiar with that entity. I believe that was in existence prior to me starting, and I feel like it might have ended either right when I got there or before, but I think it was an entity. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Are you familiar with Lynn and JoJo LLC?
Yes.
And what was Lynn and JoJo LLC?
Lynn and JoJo LLC was an entity that held real estate.
And what real estate did it hold?
It was a home in Valley Stream, New York.
And whose home is that?
I believe Epstein owned the home, but it was occupied by Lynn and JoJo, his housekeepers
And driver.
and driver. Thank you.
Are you familiar with enhanced education?
Yes.
And what is the role of enhanced education?
Enhanced Education was also known as the J. Epstein Virgin Islands Foundation, and it was a U.S. Virgin Islands foundation that made donations. I don't know its proper business purpose of what it registered. I wasn't involved or around when it was originally set up.
Are you aware of any payments from enhanced education to the Stockholm School of Economics?
Yes, I most recently learned about that as co-executor.
And what did you learn about that payment?
I learned through a litigation that Epstein made donations to that entity.
And did you have a role in processing or wiring that payment?
I don't believe, I may have been on an email, but I couldn't have, I would have never initiated the payment because I don't approve payments to charities, and I would have never been able to sign the wire or check, but I may have been on an email where Epstein was asking for money to be sent, or maybe he asked me, and it was handed off to Bella and whoever the signatory was at the time.
Understood. Are you familiar with the Florida Science Foundation?
Yes.
And what is the purpose of the Florida Science Foundation?
I believe the Florida Science Foundation was a subsidiary of Koch Foundation, and I believe that was a foundation he set up that was in place for when Epstein was incarcerated and going to his office 6 days a week.
You said Koch Foundation. Is that C-O-U?
Yes, COUQ. Thank you.
Understood. Do you know when the Florida Science Foundation was established?
I do not know.
And you mentioned that it was established during his time being incarcerated in Florida.
I believe so.
Do you know why it was established?
I don't know the purpose of why it was established, no.
Did you have a role with the Florida Science Foundation?
I don't recall specifically a role. I may have been an officer of the foundation, but I don't recall. I know the Florida Science Foundation had employees that were on payroll, so possibly I had a role with payroll or Bella had a role, but I don't recall specifics, but I know it had a payroll for the people that worked in that office.
Is it possible that you were the treasurer of the Florida Science Foundation?
It's possible, but I don't recall.
Did you process any payments to any women or girls while Mr. Epstein was incarcerated in 2008?
Again, just to clarify, I never processed any payments. I may have been on an email chain where Epstein was asking if someone was going to be paid, but I was never a signatory, nor was I ever had ability to send a wire transfer. Other than, as I testified earlier, the two entities, JSC Interiors and Butterfly Trust.
Switching gears a little bit, are you aware of Mr. Epstein assisting with visa applications for many young women during your times of employment with Mr. Epstein?
I was not aware during employment, but I've seen many articles subsequently as co-executor that he was involved with visas for individuals.
Did you review or process any payments in relation to applying for visas for young women?
I don't recall specifics. I may have been asked to pay an immigration attorney. That would be the extent of my knowledge and involvement.
Do you recall reviewing or initiating any payments to any embassies or consulates regarding immigration paperwork yourself?
I'm not personally familiar with that.
We will conclude our hour right there and go off the record.
Back on the record. Mr. Khan, I don't have too much more for you. Wanted to return briefly to the subject of Mr. Epstein's estate. You spoke this morning about your appointment as co-executor. Wanted to turn your attention, if I could, to the 1953 trust.
Yes.
And it's my understanding that contemporaneous with the execution of the will, Mr. Epstein's assets were transferred into that trust. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct.
Please.
Mr. Epstein's estate is being probated in the U.S. Virgin Islands probate court. And not until all of the remaining debts, credits, and outstanding obligations of the estate are satisfied will anything move to the trust. So currently, the trust does not have a bank account. The trust is not 100% operative and may never be operative if the estate ends with zero assets. So the trust document is its provisions when the estate is finally and fully probated. But at this point in time,
Hasn't been effectuated.
correct.
It's also my understanding that the trust agreement names yourself and Mr. Endyke as beneficiaries. Is that right?
Yes, I am a beneficiary of the 1953 trust.
And you are among the top 3 beneficiaries in terms of dollar amounts. Is that correct?
I believe I am in the top 3 of beneficiaries, yes.
And specifically, it's my understanding that the trust bequeaths $50 million to Mr. Endyke and $25 million to you. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that the trust has a bequest to me for $25 million.
I think the question that arises then, given that you described your relationship to Mr. Epstein this morning as strictly professional, why he would leave you a bequest of that size through his trust?
So I was not involved in Epstein's drafting of his will documents. But what I can say is that Epstein asked me to be, I wasn't alive, but I was requested to be his co-executor and co-trustee. I believe that it's likely that I will receive zero from Epstein's 1953 trust based on the value of its assets and its remaining obligations. As of the last publicly filed quarterly accounting, the estate had approximately $120 million of assets. Most recently, the estate settled a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit for $35 million, which leaves approximately $85 million. The estate still has, unfortunately, 4 to 5 remaining lawsuits. In addition to the fact that it is burning approximately $10 to $15 million a year in legal fees and other expenses. As far as taking the role as co-executor, that's not a role that anyone would want. I decided to take the role, as I testified earlier, as I thought I'd be best suited to know Epstein's assets and to be able to terminate employees in a respectful and kind fashion. Lastly, being able to compensate victims for all of their harms that they endured by Epstein was my top priority in taking this role after learning about all the terrible things Epstein did. To go back to your original question, actually, let me just add one more point. Being co-executor has caused tremendous strife for me and my family. The anguish, anxiety, distress is unfathomable. My reputation has suffered what I believe to be irreparable damage that I don't know if I'll ever recover from taking this role. But you asked me the question, why do you think Epstein awarded $25 million to me? I was not involved in the drafting of his documents, but what I can say is that Epstein's estate of approximately $600 million, if his estate was being probated in New York or Florida, and there was no designation of a co-executor fee. Currently, Epstein's will calls for me to receive $250,000 for what will probably amount to 10 years of work. As I just said, I don't believe I will receive anything from Epstein's trust based on the assets and liabilities. I believe that Epstein envisioned me taking this role as co-executor and co-trustee would be many, many years of work. And at the same time, he didn't provide for what would be an executor fee in New York or Florida, which I believe the statutory rate is approximately 2%. So if I was not in Epstein's trust and I was a corporate trustee, I probably would have received an executor fee of $12 million for serving as co-executor and serving as co-trustee. So that could be the only reason why he left me such a large bequest, because if you take away the $12 million, my bequest is not different than many other individuals that are in that trust for $10 million. And lastly, I would just say, other than compensating victims, I would never take on this role again as co-executor.
Thank you. Switching topics again. The BBC yesterday reported that you told, I'm quoting directly, the mansion staff to pack 2 suitcases with the contents of the safe and deliver them to Epstein's home, according to FBI agents.
Epstein's home or what does it say? Does it say Epstein's home?
I'm sorry. Thank you, Dan. To his home. That'd be referring to your home, Mr. Khan. I apologize. Did you do that?
No, I did not read the article, but I do know what you're referring to because the BBC had made inquiries to myself. What happens when the FBI raided Epstein's home in, I believe it was on the 6th, the same day he was arrested. It was either, I think it was the 6th or the 7th. When they raided his home, they broke open his safe. And for whatever reason, the FBI did not take some of the contents from Epstein's safe. When the FBI broke into Epstein's home, they broke down his door, so his door could not lock and the alarm could not set properly, in addition to the fact that they took all the electronic equipment. When Merwin, the house manager, was at the house, he realized that these items were not safe to be left alone in the house. I was on Long Island at the time. I was not in New York City. And I received a call from Merwin, who's the property manager for 90 71st Street, telling me that I packed up 2 bags of Epstein's belongings or things that were safe, and I left them with your doorman in New York City. I just wanted to let you know. I said to him, I'm not home. I'll be home in 3 or 4 days. And at that time, I'll bring it up to my apartment. When I arrived home 3 or 4 days later, I arrived in my apartment. I brought the 2 bags up. I never touched them. I never opened them. I left them in my dining room. I believe a day or 2 later, I got a call from Merwin that the FBI was at the house again, looking to collect things that they didn't take from their first visit. I believe the request of me was, can you please bring the 2 bags to the home? I was at my office in Midtown at the time. I left, I went home, I grabbed the 2 bags, I brought them to the residence, and I believe at that point in time, the FBI gave me a receipt for the 2 bags, and that is what took place. What the BBC reported is inaccurate, and the story as I understand it is exactly what I told you.
And then another topic, during your employment by Mr. Epstein, did you ever become aware of the relationship between him and Donald Trump?
Did I ever become aware of the relationship? Donald Trump is someone that Epstein liked to talk about a lot. Did I become aware of a relationship? I assumed at one point they were friends and they had a falling out, but I don't know what is true and what is not true. He never spoke to me about his relationship with Donald Trump, and I've just seen a lot of stories in the news that I don't know whether they're true or not.
You mentioned that he spoke about Donald Trump a lot. Did he ever do that in your presence?
Yes.
What did he say?
I don't recall specific conversations, but most of the conversations relating to Donald Trump or relating to, I'm sorry, respectfully, most of the conversations relating to President Trump were at the time where President Trump was in the news quite frequently from 2016 to 2020. And if President Trump was doing something that day and it made news, and I was in a meeting at his office, he might say, could you believe that President Trump did X, Y, or Z? And it might be a 30-second conversation. But that was the context of how Epstein spoke in my presence about President Trump.
And were any of his comments about having had a relationship with Trump? Just sort of to try and be a little clearer, what you described was observations that in your telling sounded political in nature. I think I'm asking whether he made comments that were more social in nature.
Not that I recall.
And again, during the period of your employment by Mr. Epstein, did you ever become aware of the relationship between Mr. Epstein and Howard Lutnick?
I was never aware of the relationship between Mr. Lutnick and Epstein. However, most recently, I did see a lot of reporting on the matter, and I am aware of a few instances of communication that involved Mr. Lutnick and Epstein, either directly or indirectly. The first that I could speak of is in 2016, Mr. Lutnick was doing renovations on his townhouse. And I believe Mr. Lutnick's property or construction manager rather sent a note to the residents that I might have received. Or maybe it went to the property manager that said, we apologize in advance. We're going to be making some noise. Please bear with us and let us know if there's any issues. That was the first. The second was that Epstein, through his friend David Mitchell, invested in a company called Adfin, which was trying to, I think they were trying to become like a Bloomberg terminal for purposes of advertising. And I believe at the time, Mr. Lutnick, either individually or through his entities, was one of the largest or the largest shareholder. The third thing that I became aware of most recently is that in 2017, John Paulson, the hedge fund manager, made a request to Epstein. I don't know if it was a request. He sent him a note mentioning that the UJA was honoring Mr. Lutnick in December. Would you be interested in donating? And Epstein donated $50,000 from one of his foundations. And the last incident or correspondence that did not involve Epstein or Mr. Lutnick directly was involved Epstein seeking employment. Epstein was looking for a new personal assistant, along with some other positions he wanted to hire. And Epstein engaged a recruiting firm out of Milwaukee, which sent some resumes over, and I believe maybe they came to me first. And when I reviewed the resumes, one of the positions on one of the women's resumes said that she was a personal assistant for a private residence in Manhattan. And the recruiter then told me that this was Mr. Lutnick's residence. I sent the resumes to Epstein and informed him that this personal assistant used to work for your neighbor, Mr. Lutnick. Epstein said, okay, great. I'd like to interview this woman. I reached back out to the recruiter, and the woman had already taken a job at that time and never interviewed with Epstein. That's what I recall from most recent news reporting and understanding.
Apart from this instance, were you ever involved in hiring any other personal assistants?
I wasn't involved in hiring. I was simply the intermediary between the recruiter, me, and Epstein. I never made decisions on hiring anyone. I got the resumes because I was dealing with the recruiter and his engagement letter, and they went first to me, maybe to screen, but I never made a decision. I forwarded everything on to Epstein.
I'm going to ask the court reporter to mark what will be Exhibit M. Which is an email dated October 3rd, 2013, between yourself and Mr. Epstein. Subject line, Emily Johnson, resume. Mr. Khan, do you recall this email?
I don't, most recently, when there was some news reporting and we received inquiries, I revisited this email, and I do recollect this email. And additionally, this is exactly what we just discussed.
This is the individual who you described.
Yes.
And who is Peter?
Peter, I believe, is Peter Mahler, was the gentleman that owns the recruiting or hiring agency from Milwaukee. He was the principal.
And did you ever discuss this potential hire with Howard Lutnick?
I don't ever recall meeting Mr. Lutnick.
And then I will ask the court reporter to mark as Exhibit N. An email thread dated November 8th and 9th of 2017.
Thank you.
Subject UJA Wall Street dinner honoring Howard Lutnick.
Just give me 1 second, please.
Sure.
I'm ready, yes.
Mr. Khan, is this the UJA solicitation that you described a few minutes ago?
Yes.
If I could point you to the second page, and this is the email from Mr. Paulson containing the solicitation, and I'm looking at the second paragraph on the page. It starts with the words "as chairman." You see that? And for the record, the full sentence reads, "As chairman of the Wall Street division, I want to make sure that as a close friend of the Lutnicks, you are aware of the event and have the opportunity to support them." And my question is simply, to your understanding, is Mr. Paulson's characterization of Mr. Epstein as a close friend of the Lutnicks accurate?
Number one, I do not know what Epstein's relationship was with Mr. Lutnick, but I would say to you that this was what appears to me a standard email that was written and sent and forwarded to many individuals on behalf of Mr. Lutnick as Paulson was trying to raise money on his behalf. I do not believe that this email, as I read it today, was written directly and solely for Epstein. So
And did Mr. Epstein attend this event?
I don't know.
And just to confirm my understanding, he did contribute $50,000 in response to this solicitation.
Yes, Epstein contributed $50,000.
I asked you a few minutes ago, Mr. Khan, about the relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. I'm just going to ask you the same question with respect to Melania Trump, and specifically during your employment by Mr. Epstein, did you ever become aware of a relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Melania Trump?
No,
Did you ever provide payments to Melania Trump?
no.
Earlier today, I believe you testified that Mr. Epstein invested in a business with Ehud Barak. Is that correct?
I do not know if they invested together or if Ehud Barak made an introduction to Epstein for Epstein to invest in a business.
And what was the nature of that business?
It was a 911 software company that is today known as Carbine.
And did Mr. Epstein proceed with that investment?
Yes,
What was the amount?
I believe he made a few investments over time, something in the amount of $3 or $3.5 million.
We can go off the record.
All right, we'll go back on the record. It is 4:37 p.m. Mr. Khan, have a few more questions for you before we wrap up today. First, starting with Mr. Epstein wanting to open his own bank account. When did Mr. Epstein first receive his license to be able to open his own bank in the U.S. Virgin Islands?
So I believe what you're referring to is Epstein's desire to use his IBE, his international banking entity, to provide banking for himself. My understanding is that Epstein received this license maybe in 2012 or 13, and it sat dormant for 5 or so years, whereby Epstein was just paying annual fees to have this license. There were not that many IBE entity banks in the U.S. Virgin Islands, but there were a few. And Epstein's desire to activate this license and try to form his own bank came after he was dropped by Deutsche Bank and was unable to find banking elsewhere.
And did you discuss the idea of starting this IBE bank with him back in 2012, 2013 when he first received his licensure?
I don't believe I was involved in him obtaining the license at all, or I don't recall discussions. He may have said in passing, I have this entity, or maybe, when the annual fees were paid, I knew what it was for, but we never had discussions about it.
And at what point did Mr. Epstein express to you that he wanted to more thoroughly pursue this idea?
I believe the timing was after the Miami Herald article, Deutsche Bank dropping him and him struggling to open up other banking relationships.
And did you advise or otherwise help Mr. Epstein during this time of officially trying to pursue opening up his bank?
Yes.
And how did you advise Mr. Epstein in this?
At the time, I had a friend who previously served, I don't recall his exact positions, but as an officer or owner of a bank. And Epstein engaged him, or Epstein's entity, which I believe at the time was Southern Country International, engaged this individual as a consultant to help the process of trying to figure out how to open a bank and how to run a bank.
And did Mr. Epstein ever take concrete steps towards opening this bank?
Yes, we began to, at the advice of the consultant, we were advised that in order to operate a bank efficiently, and I believe the consultant had bigger plans than just banking for Epstein. He wanted to be able to bank for the public as well. But the advice that he gave was that the entity, Southern Country International, needed to have a lot of capital. So some of the steps that Epstein was taking is 2 of the other entities where Epstein held his brokerage assets and cash were Southern Trust Company, Inc. and Southern Financial. I believe he started to transfer assets from those entities to Southern Country to start to build up a capital in that entity as part of the process to begin to, activate this bank.
And as part of the meetings with this consultant to initiate this bank, these meetings were in the U.S. Virgin Islands, is that correct?
We did take one trip to the U.S. Virgin Islands, but most of the meetings were based in New York, either telephone conversations or emails. I believe Epstein met with the consultant maybe once, I don't recall specifically, but a plan was being formulated, and then we took a trip down to the U.S. Virgin Islands, the consultant and myself, whereby we met with another IBE entity that was already operating. And we met with some of the local officials in order to figure out, how to activate the bank and making sure we, adhered with the rules and regulations.
Which local officials did you meet with?
I don't recall. Maybe it had to do with someone in the banking division, but I don't recall.
Did you ever meet with the then current governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands?
I don't believe I ever met with Governor Mapp.
Did you meet with any of the prior serving governors of the U.S. Virgin Islands?
During that visit, we had dinner one evening with Cecile DeYoung, who was the office manager. She ran Epstein's St. Thomas office, and her husband, who was the former governor, John DeYoung.
Did you, sorry.
I was going to say, just, I want to add one thing. It was the consultant, myself, the two of them, and I believe it was 2 or 3 other individuals.
And who are those other?
I don't recall.
Did you meet with any other elected officials of the U.S. Virgin Islands?
Other than meeting with Governor DeYoung, I don't recall ever meeting with any other elected officials.
Did anyone express any concerns about Mr. Epstein opening up this bank, given his criminal and financial histories?
I didn't hear any concerns in my visit.
Was the bank ever officially started?
No, we were in the process, as I said, of capitalizing the entity, and then shortly thereafter, Epstein was incarcerated, and then the entity ended up sending all the money back to where it came from, Southern Trust and Southern Financial, and the entity was later dissolved.
Mr. Khan, in your years of accounting work for Mr. Epstein, did you ever record or review payments to individuals described as providing massage services?
Did I ever record payments or see them? No, I don't recall ever seeing massage payments.
Do you recall seeing any categories for payments falling under the term massage?
I don't recall seeing payments for massage.
Are you aware of any purchases of massage tables or other massage goods for Mr. Epstein?
I'm not familiar with those types of purchases.
In April of 2019, did you receive a $1 million payment to your personal account from an Epstein-owned trust?
Yes,
And which trust sent you this money?
that was the trust we spoke about earlier, the 2013 Butterfly Trust.
Understood. Have you previously given a deposition, sworn statement, or formal interview about your role with Mr. Epstein prior to today?
Yes,
Which of those 3 have you provided?
this is my third. So the first one was, I believe, Jane Doe versus JP Morgan Chase.
And that was a deposition.
A deposition, I believe, in May of 2023. And I gave another deposition in, I believe it was Jane Doe versus Epstein Estate and Endyke et al. And that was in October 2024.
Have you ever been formally questioned by any government authority in connection with Mr. Epstein?
I've never been questioned by any government authority, although I did receive, I believe, a grand jury subpoena request from the Southern District of New York, and I believe from the U.S. Virgin Islands Department of Justice. I'm not sure what division, but both of the requests were for the same thing. They were asking for Epstein's estate documents. They wanted to see his will and his 1953 trust, and I believe they also asked for prior versions of some of the trusts, which we complied with and provided.
Have you ever been subject to any regulatory action?
No,
Any financial regulatory action?
no.
In I believe it was September of last year, the committee issued a subpoena to the estate And just for the record, the state has complied with the committee's subpoena. Based off of your testimony today, I just wanted to ask a follow-up question, and I can provide this as an exhibit if you all would like, but I'm just going to read a provision from the subpoena. It's item 13. All documents and communications, including but not limited to manuals or instruction booklets regarding or referring to the maintenance, management of properties or services performed at properties owned, rented, operated, or used by Mr. Jeffrey Epstein from January 1st, 1990 through August 10, 2019, including but not limited to, and we listed out several addresses. Is to our knowledge that we had two addresses for Mr. Epstein in New Albany, Ohio. Testimony from Mr. Wexner also indicated that Mr. Epstein had potentially purchased a home near Mr. Wexner in New Albany, Ohio. So my question to you is, are you aware of any properties owned by Mr. Epstein or any of his entities in New Albany, Ohio?
As of Epstein's date of incarceration and as of today, Epstein does not own property in Ohio. I believe at one point he did own a home, but I believe from the time I began employment in 2005, he no longer owned property in Ohio.
And is there any reason in which the estate would no longer have those documents to show the properties in Ohio?
I never had those documents. They were never in my possession. So unless Epstein had the documents and they were in his emails, I don't know where the documents would be.
And in the same vein, you mentioned earlier today about a entity of Mr. Epstein that owned a home in Valley Springs, New York, I think.
Valley Stream, New York, yeah.
Valley Stream, New York. Does the estate have any documentation as to the ownership of the property in Valley Stream, New York?
I believe, but I'm not 100% certain that the estate still owns that property. The property, I believe, was purchased with Epstein or Endyke as nominee owner for the benefit and use of Lynn and JoJo. Unfortunately, Lynn is no longer alive, and I believe JoJo lives there, but I believe it is property of the estate. And I believe it's, now I'm thinking, I believe it's property of the estate, and I'm 100% certain it's property of the estate and reported on our publicly filed quarterly accounting.
And then I have a broader question. I can explain it further if you need further explanation. If you indicate it's a yes or no. If you indicate yes to one of these names, I will ask some follow-ups. If you indicate no, I will not have any additional follow-ups. But the question is, have you ever had a conversation with any of the following people about Jeffrey Epstein's crimes, his criminal investigations, or in regard to sexual activity of any kind of Mr. Epstein? The first name is Doug Band.
No,
Leslie Groff.
no,
Nadia Marcinkova.
no,
Sarah Kellen.
no,
Leslie Wexner.
no,
Ted Waite.
no,
Kathy Rumler.
no,
Bill Gates.
no,
Leon Black.
no,
Steven Sinofsky.
no,
Glenn Dubin.
no,
Eva Anderson Dubin.
no,
Any member of the Rothschild family.
no.
And then a couple more follow-up questions, I promise. Approximately how much money was the monthly payroll for all of Epstein's employees or contractors?
Don't recall specifically, but I do have vague memories. I used to prepare for Epstein a budget on one sheet of paper that included all of his entities, and I believe his annual, upkeep for everything, not just his employees, for his homes, employees, planes, cars, gifts, personal expenditures, was somewhere in the $25 to $30 million range.
And understanding that there can be some fluctuation, but in a similar vein, what were Mr. Epstein's total monthly expenses across everything under his entities or control or ownership?
I'm sorry if I answered the previous question incorrectly. That was the number that I said relates to his total everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Annually, though.
Annually, yes, annually. Yes.
Annual $25 to $30 million annually.
That includes the fuel for his planes, repairs and maintenance for his planes. If he does a capital improvements on one of his properties, if he buys a car, if he gives a gift, if he hires a decorator, everything.
Was Mr. Epstein at any point ever losing money?
I guess it's a difficult question for me to ask because I just told you what his operations ran him. So in this example, we'll say $30 million. Again, this is purely hypothetical. If Epstein had a stock, Apple stock he liked, he had a lot of Apple stock. If he had, 100,000 shares of Apple stock and it went up 100 points, he would make, if my math is right, I think $10 million. And then if he made other investments, he might make more than the 30 he was spending, but that was from passive and that was unrealized gains. But Epstein, as I explained earlier, earned fees from clients, from 5 clients over the years that I worked for Epstein. So in some years, if you're asking the question, in some years was his income from clients less than his expenses? Yes, but if you factor in his investments, and many years he lost money in investments, I can't say with certainty whether he was ever losing money, but sometimes his investments were making more money than he spent, and sometimes his income was more than his expenses, but I don't think there was a particular pattern or anything.
And I believe you testified earlier that you had some concerns after Mr. Epstein's legal troubles in 2008 and 2009 when he was imprisoned. You decided to stay employed because you were a new father. There was a financial crisis. Is that accurate to what you testified to today?
In 2008, I trusted Epstein when he told me that it was a mistake that he was with a minor and that it would never happen again. But I still had concerns, and I then evaluated, along with the fact that we were in a financial crisis and I had a young family, and I decided to stay. Yes, that was my testimony.
And after 2009, did your concerns about Jeffrey Epstein end or wane?
Are you referring to a particular time after he was released from prison?
Just after he was released from
well,
prison?
After Epstein was released, I could say affirmatively that I never saw a minor. I never saw a woman that was being abused. No woman had ever come to me and saying that she was under distress, that she was being sexually abused or sexually trafficked. I never saw any payments that he made that said they were for sex. I never saw payments that said cash massages. So although Epstein was still doing terrible things that I later learned as co-executor, at that point in time, I did not, during the later years, during 2009 to 19, I did not see any signs until the Miami Herald article that alerted me to me reevaluating potentially leaving employment. There were times during the period of time that I wanted to leave, on my own because I wanted to do something else, but I never saw signs from Epstein, and later learning about the terrible things he did that made me want to leave in the interim.
And after the Miami Herald article came out in, I believe it was November of 2018, why did you not decide to leave then?
At that point, I was everything was happening quite fast. We got dropped by the bank, and I was being asked to do things. I still was thinking about leaving, but I was, quite busy at that time putting out fires. I would have liked to think with a clear head and me not dealing with trying to set up an IBE or open up accounts on Epstein's behalf, I would have certainly left working for him.
And as a representative of the estate of Mr. Epstein, as a co-executor, it's your responsibility in part to respond to subpoenas, is that correct?
Yes,
And have you ever withheld information that was requested by a subpoena or in a civil discovery?
I never personally withheld any information. However, our attorneys typically handle the subpoenas, and I could say that they do everything with 100% diligence, and I believe our attorneys have been praised by plaintiffs' attorneys that said how cooperative our attorneys have been. So I don't have any knowledge that we've ever withheld any information.
To the totality of your knowledge, both as your time working for Mr. Epstein and subsequently becoming a co-executor of his estate, was Jeffrey Epstein paid by individuals to traffic women to them?
Was he paid by individuals? Not that I'm, no.
You have a deep awareness of Mr. Epstein's finances and financial situation. Did any of his funds come from the trafficking of women?
No, not that I'm aware of.
And does Mr. Epstein have any unexplainable income in your time as his personal accountant?
No, I walked through today all of his income, and I know where it was sourced from. As I testified earlier, with certain clients, I was involved, especially Leon Black, but other clients, I was not involved, so I can't speak to the services he provided for those individuals. But I have no reason to believe that any of his income was earned in an improper fashion.
And apologies if I missed this earlier. What was the total amount of compensation that was paid by Leon Black to Mr. Epstein for his financial arrangement?
I believe that I said he paid in fees approximately $150 million. Could be, up or down 5%. And Mr. Black also contributed $10 million to one of Epstein's foundations.
And with that, we will go off the record.
Back on the record. Mr. Khan, I just have one last question for you. You spoke in our first hour of testimony this morning about the Jane Doe 4 case.
Yes, and that, I believe, is when okay, yes, I did.
My question is simply, is there anything additional beyond what you've already discussed that you can share with the committee about the status of the settlement in that case?
We're not 100, I may have made a mistake as to which plaintiff that is, because we've had quite a few. We have as many as, we have just a lot, so I can't quite remember Jane Doe 4 with 100% certainty. So I think we said the right, we know, but I'm not 100% certain. And I apologize because I generally know these, but I just don't know. Do you know who it is?
We do, and we're willing to have this discussion off the record. If it's
Yeah,
helpful
do
after.
off the record.
But if you don't mind, to the extent that you believe it is this person, you've been informed by your counsel that it is this person, we'd like you to answer the question right here today. And if it is not that person, we figure out that Jane Doe is someone else, Jane Doe 4 is someone else, we're happy to have that conversation after the fact.
I'd rather find out who it is so I can answer.
Can you can we just go off the record for 2 seconds? Because it'll,
Sure.
we'll know.
Off the record.
Back on, please.
Back on.
Yes, when we were off the record, we had a discussion about an individual previously described as Jane Doe 4. The name that was provided to us in confidence, or off the record as to Jane Doe 4's last name is not a name that neither I nor Mr. Khan is familiar with. We do not recognize that individual to be someone who has brought claims against the estate or that we have mediated with and resolved a case.
We can go off the record.